Wow. Looks like somebody got an A in wood shop. So what got you into carpentering?
Carpentry? I guess I'd have to say Jesus.
Greg's Jewish.
Are you? Well, so was JC. Wow, you're in good company.
Well, my current shop isn't as beautiful as that one, but I am excited to get back into building. Welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. Today, we're going to be building a small end table that caught my eye on Pinterest. So let's not waste any time and get started with this build. So the last couple weeks have been a real struggle for me as I haven't been able to get in the shop and actually build something. So I thought, why not bring some of my portable tools to my garage and start building something? And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So over the last couple weeks, I've seen on Pinterest this really cool end table that I thought would be a heck of a lot of fun to tackle. And it appears from that photograph that this table is made entirely out of 4x4s, which are actually 3.5 by 3.5.
Super fun fact.
So this is going to be a beefy table, and I think that, along with its unique legs, is what gives this table its appeal. And we're going to be building this project on the fly, as I've got no plans, and this project could take a couple of turns that I'm not expecting. So let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is to measure my 4x4s, and in this case, they're actually 3 3/8 and not 3.5 inches wide. And it appears from the photograph that this table has a square top and a square bottom made out of 4 4x4s. And since we're dealing with 3 3/8 inch stock, we can do some math and multiply that 3 3/8 of an inch by 4 to give us 13.5 inches.
I hate math. You don't know the meaning of the word hate. You also don't know the meaning of the word scalene.
So I need to cut off 8 pieces of that 4x4 to 13.5 inches long. So the first thing that I'll do is to clean up one of the ends of the 4x4. Now that I have one end cleaned up, I can make a tick mark right at 13.5 inches. Now that I have my markings all aligned, I've set up a stop block so that I can make 8 repeatable cuts. So now that we have our 8 pieces cut out, both for the tabletop and table bottom, I now want to clean up these 4x4s. And that's because each one of these 4x4s has rounded over edges. And in order to make this look as clean as possible, I want to get rid of those. And we're going to do this over at the table saw. And as you can see here, I've got my table saw blade raised as high as it will go, and it won't get through this entire 2x4 on one pass. So I'll have to make one cut and then flip it over and do the second cut.
It's not rocket science.
And I'll just make sure my blade is completely square before I make any of these cuts. So now I'll just run the 4x4s through the table saw and clean up 2 of the adjacent sides. So with 2 of my adjacent sides cleaned up and completely square, I'm now going to adjust my table saw fence to 3 1/4 and clean up the other 2 sides. So now that I have the top of my table and the bottom of my table planed and jointed as much as I can with the tools that I have, it's now time to start to think about glue up. And for this process, I'm simply sifting through the wood faces to find the most pretty side to face on top. And since I'm working with limited tools here, I'm going to clamp up both the top and the bottom together with the clamps that I have available. So while we're letting that glue set up, I now want to focus my attention on making the 4 legs that will go with this table. So I'd like to make this table 24 inches tall, which is a good height for any side table that's going to go alongside of a couch. Now we're going to make these legs out of the same material that we made the tabletops with, so we just need to mill this 4x4 up. And as you remember, each one of these legs has a slight angle to it. And since we have a very thick tabletop and table bottom, 24 inches should give us plenty of material to work with. So I'm going to handle these legs in the same fashion that I did with that tabletop and table bottom and cut out 4 at 24 inches. So now that I've cut out 4 legs at 24 inches long, I now want to mill these up in the same way that I did that tabletop and table bottom, getting each one of these to 3 1/4 inches wide by 3 1/4 inches tall. So now that we have all 4 legs roughly milled out to 24 inches long and 3 1/4 by 3 1/4, let's put those to the side and go back to our tabletop and table bottom. So now that we've let the glue set up, it's time to get these out of clamps, and then we can work on sanding these down so they're completely flat. So with the 2 pieces out of clamps, you can see there's some glue squeeze out as well as some saw marks that I need to remove. So I'm going to do that next with an orbital sander. Now on the underside of the tabletops, I noticed some pretty significant gaps where we tried to join the boards together. However, there's a very easy solution to make these gaps disappear. All we're going to do is add a little bit of wood glue and squish it into those cracks.
Is that a sex thing?
Once we've done that, we can add some sawdust. Doing this, along with not having a dust collection system attached to our sander, should seal up all those gaps. So now that we have the top and bottom roughly sanded, it's now time to address the dimensions of these 2 pieces. Since we removed material when squaring up these 4x4s, they're now at a different dimension. And if I do the measurement, they're right at 12 5/8. So I need to cut the length of this down to the same dimension. So over at the table saw, I'll set my fence to 12 5/8 and just nibble off the edge of each of these pieces. With both of the pieces squared up, we can begin to start to talk about the legs. So in order to set up the legs, I'm going to use real life dimensions. I know that this corner is perfectly square. So I'm going to take a measurement from the top of this table all the way over to 24 inches. With that measurement made, I then can take my square and strike a line on my tabletop surface right at that 24 inches. With those 2 measurements made, I can now line up my tabletop and my table bottom to those reference lines. So I'll first take my tabletop and line it up to the corner of this table, making sure that the side and the top are completely flush with the table. Then I can line up the bottom with that line I struck and make sure that the edge is completely flush. With my tabletop and my table bottom completely aligned, I now want to take a leg and rest it right up against each one of those work pieces. And this is a little bit difficult to show, but what I'm looking for is the very side of this leg to match up directly with the corner of this top. And you'll want to do this on both sides. Now that we have everything aligned, I now can take a pencil and strike a line on the leg on both sides. With these markings complete, we should now have the angles that we need to cut over at the miter saw. And it looks like for my table, I'm right at 36 degrees, but your table may just be a little different. So I'll go ahead and make the cuts with the miter saw. With one of the legs cut out, I now have a template that I can use to cut down the other 3 legs. And I'll take my template and mark out my other 3 legs. And with each leg marked, I can now cut them down to size. So now that we have each leg cut out, I've gone ahead and sanded it so that I don't have to worry about that later. Now we need to start thinking about joinery, which is something that I haven't been looking forward to since the beginning of this project. So obviously I could just glue this, but since this has a weird design, I want to throw a couple of screws in here. And I think what I'm going to do is actually drill in 2 screws into each leg and then put some plugs on top of each screw head.
Going to get him some plugs.
So what I'm going to do is to take the show side, or the top of the tabletop and the bottom of the tabletop, and take a leg and trace out where this leg will actually land on the bottom of each side. And I'll do this just by striking a line with my pencil. So with these boxes laid out, I'm now able to figure out 2 points where I want to drill out a hole with a Forstner bit. These are where I'll sink the screws into my legs. So now that I have all my drill holes marked out, I'm now going to take a 5/8 inch Forstner bit, and I've got it marked to 3/4 of an inch deep, and I've done that with some painter's tape. Now all that's left to do is to drill out each one of those holes. And my goal here is to stay as perpendicular as possible. And with the holes drilled out on the top of the table, I'll do the same thing to the bottom. So now that we have all the holes drilled out in both pieces, it's now time to start to think about assembly. So I'm going to set up my table for glue up, and we'll go from there. So this glue up is going to be a fairly complex glue up. With all those angles, it's going to be very difficult to use clamps. And that's why I'm using these 3.5 inch wood screws to act as clamps until that glue cures. So I'm going to add 1 leg at a time. I'm going to add wood glue to the end grain on each side of the leg, and then I can place it in between the tabletop and table bottom. And once it's fitted into place and in the right location, I can secure it with 2 wood screws. With 1 leg attached, I'll simply rotate the table and repeat the process for each leg.
What do you call a woman with just 1 leg? Eileen?
So now that I have all those screws in, I'm now going to take some clamps and make sure all those seams are completely tight. So you may have noticed when I was putting on the clamps, I was actually backing off some of those screws, tightening the clamps down, and then reinserting the screws. This is because a lot of the screws were actually preventing a lot of these joints from coming together. And you'll notice that a lot of these joints aren't perfect, but that's okay because we have a solution for that. Also, we're going to be staining this in a darker color, so if there is any gaps, those gaps will disappear. So while that glue is setting up, let's work on cutting out some plugs to cover those screw heads. So these are some plug cutters in various sizes that I featured in a previous video. Since we used a 5/8 inch Forstner bit, we're going to use the 5/8 inch plug cutter. And we need at least 16 of these as we have 16 holes in our table. And I'll just pop those out with a screwdriver. So here I have that table out of clamps, and I'm just going to add a little bit of wood glue to each hole and tap in a plug. So while we let those plugs dry up, I want to work on some of the cracks in the legs. And we're going to fix those in the same fashion that we did those tabletop and table bottom. And this crack right here is probably one of the worst of the bunch. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of wood glue and then squeeze in some sawdust. And once that's sanded, the crack should be invisible. And I'm just going to repeat this same process on any other visible crack on the table. With all of my gaps filled in, I'm now going to flush cut all these plugs and sand them down. So one of the last things that I want to do before I start sanding this table is to put a small chamfer on the very top of this table. And I'll do this with my palm router. Now that I have that chamfer in, it's time for sanding. Now after about a half hour of sanding, I finally have this table in a place where it's ready to be finished. Before we do that though, I want to put some adjustable legs on the bottom of this table. And here I've marked out where each foot will go where it won't intersect with those screws. Well, that's about all she wrote. This thing's ready for some stain and finish, and then we can take one last look. Well, that's going to wrap up today's build. I'm really pleased with how this turned out, and I think this will make a great addition to any couch.
Oh, hell yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know it was a little bit different given the circumstances of my shop. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Until next time, take care as always.